You use very abstract ideas about monsters in Trollbabe. There's no bestiary. That's true. I see this as a general trend in design, even some fantasy designs. Why did you abandon the idea of a list of monsters for Trollbabe and other designs? Again, not speaking toward general trends. I'm dubious about my relation to general trends. But in terms of, okay, Trollbabe specifically, was very, or is very oriented toward I give you no setting. I give you several tropes, and you are to make of them what you want with them. And after you play Trollbabe, through several adventures, you are going to have your own setting, which will then reverberate back into what new situations might be encountered, and therefore will take on a life of its own that I never saw and will never see, and isn't. It's not that it's not canonical, there's not a canon. It's not there. So avoiding the bestiary in favor of what monsters and adversaries are for in Trollbabe was much more important. And as you point out, yes, there are two abstract principles that I said should intersect when you make them. One is that the social circumstances and what in that text is called stakes, which isn't the same as what other people call stakes anywhere. The various supernatural or bestial adversaries, if there are any, are a piece of that. Sometimes they're just wildlife, but most of them. So if you have, I don't know, fanged carnivorous horses, or who knows what, the makeup, whatever. They should be a part and parcel of the social history of that area, and the little relationship map you've made is embedded in that history. And that's what they're for. And you just use the magic or what have you to jazz it up. It is literally an amplifier of things that we understand. Now, Circle of Hands has actually a more understandable or familiar list of creatures. And you'll notice that I split it very, very carefully into beasts and monsters, and then undead and demons. For Emborion, Eidolons and Avatars, for Urbaja, undead and demons. So there's kind of a real categorical, very separated taxonomy for these things in Circle of Hands. Each one having a very different bench starting array of concepts that they all conform to within that category. In the case of the beasts, and this goes back to Lorenzo's question, what's interesting about beasts is that they're not just animal furniture running around. It's very much like NPCs. A lot of the people are, in fact, just people furniture running around. And then there are people who get names or have been given names and become much more active agents in play. Beasts are the same. A beast, by definition, is a non-human who has that status. So when you make a beast, you're not just saying, well, what's a cougar doing around here? Or what is what's a bull, or a bear or something doing around here? It is instead, who is this bear? And what does it want? What is it doing? What do the people in the area call it? That it's a character. So that's one thing about the beasts in Circle of Hands. You can kind of see how that's related to my thoughts with what I talked about for Lorenzo's question, I hope. And then similarly, there's also for the monsters, it's a little bit more like Trollbabe in that the monster stuff is considered to be an amplification of something familiar. In this case, something directly social or psychological about humans. every single monster is a distortion of human stuff in some way or another. There are a lot of different angles on that, but they don't exist effectively or very much as ecological. I touch a tiny bit on their ecology here and there, kind of for fun, but not really in the sense that they are truly wildlife. They are very much fantasy elements. You take, it's a humanocentric view of fantasy and fiction where we care about something, or something takes on its distorted or frightening or gaudy qualities because of the amplification or isolation of some recognizable human priority. Or ways that we interact in some fashion. So it's pretty straightforward, really. I mean, just look at any one of them and it just jumps right out at, what are the golden? Okay. Not really intended to be mysterious. In fact, far from it. Hopefully that answers a little bit. Which is to say that if I'm going to have a creature list, it will still be operating according to those abstract principles of whatever they may be for that game. Those abstract principles will be factoring in to create the details. Now, whether I go ahead and make up a bunch of details for you as a presentation, as I do in Circle of Hands, or whether in Trollbabe I say do it yourself for reasons, doesn't really matter. So that's some of my thinking about that anyway. Finally, that brings us to Jesse's question, which is, as with all the others, no small thing. A lot of games feature some kind of organization with clear mission statements, and all the player characters are assumed to be loyal and dutiful members in. You see this a lot in supernatural monster hunting games. He names a few, and obviously there's 15, 20 more titles that go into that same parenthesis. But a lot of science fiction and fantasy games have them too. What are your thoughts on this as a baked-in organizing feature of play? Then a couple of more questions past that. Let's stop right there, though, because there's some history here. Lorenzo and I had a dialogue about this on the website a bit ago in one of the seminar. It's in one of the seminar discussions. And then I took that plus a certain amount of dialogue that I had with Helma about this and actually put it into People in Play as coursework. So yes, I think this is a big deal, but what is happening here? Briefly, and I think it's better presented in the course. Let's talk about togetherness among us as players, which is no more nor less than, are we paying attention to what one another does with good reason? That's the real issue. Period. And the fictional justification of doing so is literally subservient to that. If we're doing that, even if the fiction doesn't connect our characters in any way possible. I mean, we could even have a Night on Earth situation where you have all these different things happening all over the place and they have nothing to do with one another. We're together in this. We're paying attention. If that's occurring, that is a huge part of play, because even things that don't directly impact on the fiction can impact thematically. And I know, perhaps intuitively, without even processing it verbally, that what I just did is in direct and dramatic contrast to what you just did, for example, or perhaps very similar to it, whatever. But the point is that we know that as we're sitting there, and it matters to us. So that's the first point. The fiction cannot save you. The fiction cannot make that happen. You can take the characters and you can create a table that we all roll on that says how we relate to each one of these other characters. And you can say we are all in this same group with the same ideology, with the same goal, with the same, God knows what, we've signed in blood, right? Our psychological commitment to this thing. You can do everything you can, and you take it as given. Okay, everybody playing, you all have this same thing. None of that will create what I just talked about. If you have it, and you do some aspect of that, fine. It, makes the fictional interactions of that togetherness, more consequential, and that's fine and very enjoyable. But it can't make it happen. It doesn't go the other way. You can't have any kind of fictional hookup actually generate the togetherness of attention and interest and relevance among us. At best, it can inspire it, but more relevant if we are already inspired to play and pay attention in this fashion and receive the validation of doing so because it works, then whatever bit of fictional justification for it we can work with, up to and including being one another's deadly enemies, up to and including having no relevance to each other whatsoever. On the other hand, it is fun to think about the dynamics among people who are allied in some fashion. So, for example, in Circle of Hands, they are, in fact, all circle knights. But you'll notice that I nailed down some aspects of that while throwing the others to the winds. Unlike many such games, there is no circle code. You'd think that with circle knights, Knights of the Round Table, you would think that there would be a chivalric code or a knightly code that we have all sworn to, and that we are going on a mission to go do a thing. Neither of those is the case for Circle of Hands. I actually nailed down the group who self-identify together as not having those things. That's important. So it's the same thing with any number of these other games. You say we're together in this fashion, and then what is free to vary up and down and change or not to be unified among us? Boy, this leads to all sorts of interesting things that go down rabbit holes because people start generalizing about superheroes and not knowing what they're talking about and saying generalizations that are counterfactual. And then that gets me mad and I don't want to talk anymore. So I've gone down that road too many times. If we go to one of the names you mentioned, Vesson, and I think that it stands in very nicely as a late version of many of these others. You mentioned Chill, and of course there's many others. The Investigators. Or if we go to some of these other games, Shadowrun, a number of others where we are a attack squad, right? A teamo, special weapons section, to use that term from before, to go do a thing. Notice that in a lot of those games, the attack squad merc thing, the issue is not so much our logistic ability to go do the thing. It's about whether our boss is going to betray us or not. And that becomes the balancing act. What have we been not told? What have we been not told? Are we expendable in this? Are we, cannon fodder for them to do something else? What's going on here? Are we going to come back triumphantly and each get a bullet? I mean, that actually really... So again, it's a matter of what's nailed down and what isn't. In the case of the investigation games, I find that they fail in this regard. And Vesson, I have written about and talked about in some detail, in that it does a particularly good job of making up, we each make up very, very distinctive characters, and we each have relationships to one another, which are positive or negative, all of which I actually find quite compelling, because it opens up the question of, given this hodgepodge of individuals, what the hell is going to happen if they try to do something together? It's wide open, except that it's not wide open. Then the other side of the game kicks in, and it turns out not to make any difference on this earth what you do or what you roll, because the story must go on. as the rules are extremely explicit at articulating and reinforcing. So it's basically a big, it's basically a big scam. What we're doing in terms of a mission statement, an organized thing, those are, in my opinion, most productive when they nail down certain things so that other things might vary and have different and unknown outcomes in play. When you nail it down so hard that you know where the group's going to go, what they're going to do, what could possibly happen, and everything is sort of safely nailed down and safe, or as in the case of Vesson, it is made safe because any of the apparent diversity has been negated in practice. That's where I think you've lost yourself. That's where play is now, dinner theater, as I often say for Call of Cthulhu. You're basically, sitting around doing accents and nothing else. So the idea here is that under those circumstances, I don't think there's a whole lot of togetherness. So all the effort to make the togetherness has basically accomplished nothing. I don't feel together with these people. I don't care what your character does. And what your character does or what my character does doesn't really matter, because our whole point in this scene is to find that fucking clue that's waiting for us anyway. Here's another point. And I run into this in particular with Trollbay, when people have this visceral, horrified response that the characters may not even be in the same adventures that we're playing simultaneously. How is that even possible? I'll be sitting here with nothing to do, they say. Well, I have been in a lot of games where our characters were all in the same room for every single scene. Every single moment of play, our characters were all together at all times and interacting, with everything going on, and we're constantly being asked, what do you do? And all those things. And you know what? I spent 85% of the time playing sitting there with nothing to do, because the nature of play was either blocking me from doing anything interesting whatsoever, except for, I don't know, I do this, or was procedurally set up so that literally I was not allowed to speak. I was just sitting there with nothing to do. So putting the characters into the same room and forcing them all to be the same together, same place, and doing the same thing nominally, you all have this job, isn't going to create that togetherness. And in many ways, given the various procedures, can actually work against it. So with any luck at all, this clarifies my position about the issues that you've raised. Again, I think I present them better and with a more reasonably pedagogical approach in the course. But you go on and say, where's the line between such an organization being a productive element of play and it just being a vestigial device predicated on the assumption that the PCs must operate as a party? Well, I think I've answered this. The line has to do with the predictability of outcomes in the larger sense, but in any sense, in the immediate sense and in the larger sense. If the more you nail down the predictability of those outcomes in the immediate scenes and from scene to scene and the course of events as a whole, the more you nail that down, the less productive it is. And furthermore, that element of other people's activity being relevant to you, not to your character, to you, then creates a very productive environment for it becoming relevant to your character, either fully abstractly or very directly in the same with the characters are in the same room, whichever. But that's the fundamental. How we achieve that, how we encourage that, and all the rest of it, because you can't snap your fingers and say, everybody just do that. That also is a deeper question, which I do think has its solutions. All right, that's it for this time. Let's see if I can edit this mess and hopefully make it at least semi-watchable. Thank you to everyone.